And one of my mentors told me at one point, he said, Jess, everybody deserves to be led well. And whenever I heard that, I was just sort of another light bulb moment for me. So that applies to the people that you work with. It applies to the customers and the patients that you serve. It applies to the people in your house, and it applies to you yourself. There is not one person that you can identify that deserves to not be led well. Everyone deserves to be led well.
Welcome to the Pharmacy Quality Solutions Quality Corner Show, where quality measurement leads to better patient outcomes. This show will be your go-to source for all things related to quality improvement and medication use in healthcare. We will hit on trending health topics as they relate to performance measurements and find common ground for payers and practitioners. We will discuss how the Equip platform can help you with your performance goals, and we will also make sure to keep you up to date on pharmacy quality news. Please note that the topics discussed are based on the information available at the date and time of recording. Information or guidelines are updated periodically, and we will always recommend that our listeners research and review any guidelines that are newly published. Buckle up and put your thinking cap on. The Quality Corner Show starts now.
Hello, Quality Corner Show listeners. Welcome back to the PQS podcast, where we focus on medication use, quality improvement, and how we can utilize pharmacists to improve patient health outcomes. I'm your host, Nick Dorich, and today we are looking ahead and thinking about how we can set clear expectations for 2022. I often reference the quality improvement process on this show and in my daily work with pharmacists and other members of the pharmacy team. Every one of us needs to have a plan, and you need to have the understanding and flexibility to adjust your plan when it is necessary. Now, how do you do this? Well, you need a leader for your improvement efforts. This doesn't necessarily need to be the pharmacy owner or the pharmacy manager or even a pharmacist, actually. This can be any member of your team. Any one of us can really be a team leader, depending upon the situation. Now, to help determine how we set up a team for success, we are bringing in someone that I know as an established pharmacy leader, a proponent of leadership development, and someone that is also not a stranger to the PQS Quality Corner Show. So with that, I'm going to welcome our guest for today, that being Jesse McCullough. Jess, welcome back to the PQS Quality Corner Show.
Hey, Nick, it is so good to be back and to reconnect with you and to reconnect with the listeners of the Quality Corner Show.
Excellent. Well, yeah, I'm really excited to have you here today, Jess. You and I have known each other for a long time. I won't cite how many years for protection for both of us.
Exactly.
Now, before we get started for today's podcast, I do want to make sure we learn a little bit about you. Some of our listeners to the show, they may not have been introduced to you previously. So do you mind giving us a rundown what's your background in healthcare and pharmacy, and then what you are passionate about in the healthcare world?
Yeah, absolutely, Nick. So like so many of the listeners to the Quality Corner Show, I started off my career as a retail pharmacist. I actually can trace my way back to an organization known as Thrift Drug, which fewer and fewer people can recall today. But I will tell you that, if you're not familiar with the history, Thrift became part of Eckerd Pharmacy. Eckerd became part of Brooks. Brooks became part of Rite Aid. And through that, I would tell you, Nick, that I thought that my career path was going to be in the pharmacy and moving up through just operations management. I really saw that, if you would have talked to me 20 years ago, I would say that, well, one day I'll be a district manager or a regional VP or whatever that turns out to be. But I had a major pivot earlier in my career where I got into clinical services. And that was a new and a bit of a buzzword at the time. And so I had the privilege of being in on the ground floor of several of, I would say, staples that we see in the community pharmacy today with pharmacy-based immunization. I was one of the first 13 pharmacists that we trained. And when it was all said and done, we had trained well over 13,000 pharmacists, which was really a cool thing. And we did something similar with MTM. I think the first year we did MTM, I had something like 35 pharmacists, and we get to where every pharmacist in the company is providing MTM services. From there, it just got into the nuance. We were able to operationalize clinical services, and that was in, the training, that was Just how do we make this process better? How do we make it more, how do you integrate it more naturally into your everyday life? Because at one point, if you titled something clinical, that was something that was radically different from your day-to-day operations. And now it is much more seamless. I'm not saying that there aren't hiccups here and there, but it was much more seamless. Along the way, I had the opportunity to learn about performance measures in the early days of the Pharmacy Quality Alliance, and had the privilege of working on something that became known as the Pennsylvania Project, which is where you all can correct me on this, but it sort of gave the feasibility for a platform like Equip to come into existence. Can we give a pharmacist a report card, and then ultimately can they do something about it? And through the work that we did there, we were able to demonstrate pharmacists had that. From there, I had the opportunity to spend a couple of years there with you, Nick, at PQS, and worked with about 1,800 stores, really driving those adherence issue, or driving the adherence scores and the adherence issues that those stores were facing. And something that became very, very clear to me was just that there is such a need for pharmacists to have more skill and more training in leadership, and that's the space I've been working in the last couple of years. Now I work from, individuals all the way up to larger corporations to help them, improve their offerings and, really address some of the leadership issues that they have to be able to make an impact in the marketplace and to deliver value.
Well, Jess, thanks for the introduction. And that's exactly why I wanted to have you for the show today. We are going to be talking about that leadership aspect because, I think about it for myself, and this just might be my reflection, right? You go through pharmacy school, most of your time is spent learning about clinical interactions and med chem and pathophysiology. But it's those other parts, how you interact with people, not just the patient, but the other members of your team. That's a huge part of what we do day in, day out as a pharmacist. So it's something that, as we're talking about coming up with a plan for 2022, because it's right around the corner, we need to think a little bit differently about that, and we need to be improving our skills in that arena. Now, Jess, before we get into the questions, we're going to pause for a moment. We're going to hear the breakdown.
Now it's time for the breakdown. As Quality Corner Show host, Nick will ask 3 main topic questions. Our guests will have a chance to respond, and there will be some discussion to summarize the key points. This process will repeat for the second and third questions, which will wrap up the primary content for this recording. After that, expect to end on a closing summary, usually containing a bonus question. Now that we have described the process, let's jump into the questions.
All right, Jess, we're going to go ahead now, get started for today's conversation about leadership and how it relates to quality improvement. What we're discussing today are elements that really everyone in every field should be considering, and they should be applying for their work. And when I say work, I don't mean just the Monday to Friday day job or your 8 to 10 hour pharmacy shift. These lessons can be applied to your side hustle, to the items in your personal life, and yes, of course, that day job. Now, my first question for you today is understanding what leadership is and what it is not. Specifically, how do we differentiate between leadership and management, 2 terms or practices that can often be misconstrued for one another?
Yeah, that is so true, Nick. People will often just interchangeably use the terms leadership or leader and manager or management. And those terms could not be more different from one another, right? I have a couple of phrases here that I share just to help illustrate this. A leader is someone who does the right thing, whereas a manager is someone who does things right. A manager wants to have that process go again and again. A leader is someone who looks at what's going on and will challenge the status quo, whereas a manager, their objective is to maintain the status quo. The short way that I remember that is this: it's just leaders lead and managers maintain. And, so I want to make sure that I am abundantly clear about this here in the early going. I'm going to talk a lot about a lot about leadership, but I don't want you to take that in any way that I look down upon management. Leadership is so important, but management is important as well. And when it comes down to it, we all have some mix of this that we deal with. There's part of us that we have to be a leader. There's part of this that we have to be a manager. And, if we're really going to grow our impact, if we're going to add more value to the marketplace, then we need to be able to grow our skills. We need to be able to lead ourselves to a new place. Many of the listeners may even have the title of pharmacy manager. And, the manager works to make sure that the trains are running on time, right? To make sure that these metrics are being hit. And it's a very important skill. Yet we are also expected to lead the team. And this is something, and I came out of school, I graduated I went to school last millennium, just for those folks on those folks that are listening. It's been a long time since I've been in pharmacy school. But when I came out, you're expected now to lead a bunch of people. You're expected to lead a pharmacy team, and you're also expected to lead your patients somewhere, right? The leader leads people from where they are to a better place. And, for the listeners, Nick and I can see each other on a video call here, and I'm talking with my hands, and I realize that doesn't translate well at all for a podcast. But, if you put one hand at your waist and one hand at your head, the leader's job is to take you from the waist to the head, right? It's to go somewhere, and it's to go uphill. And for anybody that's ever tried to run uphill, it's not easy. Leadership is a challenge. Yet that's what we are. That's what we are out there looking to do. And I guess the other thing that I've found with leadership is that it's ubiquitous. It's everywhere. Once I started to learn about leadership, it was something where I realized that there's a lot of poor leadership out there. I don't care what your political leanings are. You can probably find somebody who you think in the political space is a poor leader. Within the organization that you serve, within your household, and where it really hit home for me was when I looked in the mirror and I said, well, here's somebody that needs to be led better. And I think those are some of the things that just come to mind. I think you touched on it just a moment ago here, Nick. It's that really there's not a whole lot of formal instruction on this, and by and large, what we get with leadership is it's just modeled for us, and we just take what's modeled for us and we repeat it, right? What we find is that we have some people that will model good leadership for us. We have others that will model bad leadership for us. And some will even go way off the deep end and it's like the worst, awful, whatever superlative negative term, that's what we're given. And that these are sort of the blunt tools that we have that we start to work with. I would tell you this story. I had the opportunity to be helping out a colleague at one point, and as a result, I was living out of a hotel for a long period of time. And one of the things that I did is I would walk, in the morning or in the evening. And Nick, I could take you to the actual piece of sidewalk where I was walking, I was listening to a podcast, and somebody said, on that podcast, leadership skills can be learned. And the light bulb went off for me. It absolutely went off for me, because if you would have asked me prior to that, I probably would have told you that we all are just sort of given a certain amount of leadership skill or ability, and that was it. And you just rode that pony as far as it would go. But once I learned that these are skills that you can learn and develop, that started me down this pathway of, okay, what are those skills? What are those things that I need to learn? And, that has been really an eye-opening experience for me. And I will tell you this, as you understand what leadership is, and as you improve those skills, you're going to get better. And then what naturally happens is the people around you start to get better, because as leadership is contagious, right? Leadership is absolutely contagious, whether it's good or bad, right? You have this type of thing that happens all around us. And one of my mentors told me at one point, he said, Jess, everybody deserves to be led well. And whenever I heard that, that was just sort of another light bulb moment for me. So that applies to the people that you work with. It applies to the customers and the patients that you serve. It applies to the people in your house, and it applies to you yourself. There is not one person that you can identify that deserves to not be led well. Everyone deserves to be led well.
Yeah, Jess, as you go through your descriptions, and I go back to your phrase, leaders lead, managers maintain. This is my pharmacist brain kicking in, and it's somewhat like subjective and objective notes in that soap note that you're right. The objective is kind of the management part. What needs to get achieved? It needs to be achieved by X date, X time, X people need to be involved. It's somewhat numerical, if you will. Leadership, though, is a lot more personal. And as you said, leadership can be learned, it can be applied. The other thing I'd point out, different organizations, different groups, different geographies are going to have different cultures. So, achieving a certain thing, that can be done wherever. Having a positive culture and positive leadership, though, that has to be different. That has to be tailored a little bit differently for different audiences. So I'll pause there, Jess, and see if you have got any additional comments before we move on to the next question.
Yeah, I would just respond to that in this way. A leader very much recognizes that you have to treat people differently. I recognize that how I interact with you, Nick, is different than how I interact with somebody else. Whereas a manager does everything they can to do everything exactly the same. I'll treat you the same as somebody else, right? It's just that's just sort of a hallmark and a difference between the two. And, I would tell you, I was standing in a pharmacy in one of the Carolinas and having a conversation with pharmacists. It was specifically around the statin adherence measure. And this pharmacist looked at me and said, I have no idea what to say to my patients. And what I heard during that now keep in mind that as you learn more about leadership, you will filter things through either the filter, the lens, whatever the right word you want to use is. You'll see things in a different way. But when this gentleman said to me, I don't have any idea what to say to my patients to help them improve their statin adherence, what he said, what I heard him say is, I have no idea how to lead my patients to better health. And that's Jesse McCullough's interpretation of it. But perhaps there's more than one listener out there that would say the same thing, that say, you know what, I really struggle to figure out how do I help some of these people. I need to have a more robust tool set to be able to engage these folks.
Now, Jess, I want to keep us on this train of thought. And our second question is going to be related to part of that quality improvement process. We want to get better, but at the very least, if we can cut out or remove those things that we shouldn't be doing, that is also progress, my friend. So when it comes to leadership, what are those things, those phrases, those ideas that we should avoid? I think some of the obvious examples are things like, quote unquote, we've always done things this way, or, we're not going to take new ideas, right? But what are other blind spots that leaders should consider when they are working with their team?
Yeah, well, I would say this: if you keep doing the same things you're doing, you're going to keep getting the same things that you're getting, right? That's a pretty obvious thing. But I would say there's probably three things I would throw out here to at least to consider. By no means is this an exhaustive list. It's just perhaps a place for us to start. But the three things that come to mind are that so many people have no plan to improve their leadership skills. One of the questions I'll ask people is, well, what's your plan to improve? What's your plan to become a better leader? And oftentimes you get a blank response, or you'll get a lot of stuttering with I'm doing this, or I'm going to do a CE, right? And that's great, but needs to probably be a little more than that. The second thing is just a lack of clarity in being able to declare and define where it is that you're going, right? So just picking up on what I just mentioned to you, leaders take people uphill from where they are to somewhere else. What does that somewhere else look like? In the adherence world, we might say we want to go from a score of 75 to a score of 85, whatever. We got to be able to define that. We got to be able to set something that becomes tangible. And then another issue that we have as leaders is we need to have the humility to recognize that we don't know it all. that we ourselves have blind spots. We need to be able to turn that to our advantage. So if I can just unpack those a little more here, Nick, there are many pharmacists, pharmacy teams, and people in general out there. They're very frustrated, right? I've learned, and I've perhaps learned this the hard way, that the people that deal with frustration, it's largely due to poor leadership. And this is just the wonderful secret to take from this is if you can identify poor leadership, you can also identify the opposite of that. You can identify good leadership, right? Nick, you and I are foodies, right? Or we both like a good burger, right? Well, if we have a bad burger, we know it's bad because the opposite exists out there in the world that we would be able to go to. And if anything, if you observe bad leadership, all that is the invitation for good leadership, right? There is just that call. So as leaders, we must always be improving our skill set. Now, my son is an avid video game player, and he'll just talk he'll talk at length for how wonderful these video games are and how these new upgrades and whatever. And really there's some parallels you can draw from that, whether you're a video game player or not. But, in the early start, and I'll go back, I'm a Pac-Man guy, right? I played Pac-Man whenever it was in the arcades, for those people that may ever remember an arcade. But, the first couple times you're running Pac-Man around the board, the ghosts are slow. But as you get better, the ghosts get faster, right? The problems come, the challenges become more difficult. And the same thing applies to us as leaders. As we become better at solving problems, we're going to find that we have more difficult problems to solve. You're going to just expand your reach in that regard. And if anything, we're still going through a global pandemic. And that's an up level in difficulty right there, if I may say so. And many groups have struggled through this global pandemic. But I'll also point this out: not everyone has. Right there, you and I can both come up with a list of pharmacies that have actually done all right during this time. Some that have been able to take the cards that life has dealt them, and to make an improvement for that. And I would suggest to you that the main difference for that is the leadership. How are they approaching those challenges that come to them? It's not that they had access to better resources or more resources or whatever. They just figured out a better way to lead their team through that. Now, sometimes as leaders, we know where we want to go, but we're not really good at really saying what that looks like. The leader's job is to continually define what success looks like. And let me see, I don't know if any of your podcast listeners take notes, but I'll say that again. The leader's job is to continually define what success looks like. And this is something that is missed way too often. And sometimes the leader won't define it, or what they do define is so abstract that how you interpret it and how I interpret it are two dramatically different things. I will suggest that this is one of the major challenges that people in general face as we go through the pandemic. And if I was to say, what does success look like? I think a lot of people would say, well, success during the pandemic is going to look like the elimination of COVID. And I don't know if that's really a reasonable. You're probably more of an immunologist and virologist than what I am these days, Nick. But I don't know that that's the right endpoint, right? So we need people out there to say, hey, this is what it's going to look like, so that we know, so that we can judge how we're doing and we can make adjustments.
Jess, do you mind if I interrupt you here?
Yeah, please do.
As you're talking the leadership part, it just has me thinking, right? Leadership, and it was there continuously noting what success looks like, right? Mm-hmm. That's different than a manager, because a manager, it's going to be, again, somewhat task-based, what gets done, when it gets achieved by, et cetera, et cetera. The leadership aspect, it's somewhat empowering or enabling the individuals for them to figure it out on their own, to achieve the results in a way that they find meaningful or engaging. And that in its own way gives people a little bit more freedom. And turns out when you give people in their work and their job some of that bandwidth to get things done in their own way, that is going to empower them for future success, I think. And is that some of that difference, again, leadership versus management?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I can tell you, I remember people will chuckle at this, but when we first were doing the immunization program over a decade ago, we would say, well, hey, you know what? We want to give 100 flu shots this season, whatever the number was. And we said, okay, over the course of a 90-day flu season, you want to aim to give like 3 shots a day. And man, there were people that didn't see how on earth you'd ever be able to give 3 shots a day. I'll suggest that today you have pharmacies that have given 3 immunizations within 10 minutes of the store opening. It's just, those. Now, how do we get to that point? We had to challenge the status quo. We had to look at things differently and rework some of those different scenarios that were out there. That's for sure.
Yeah. So Jess, with that, I want to move us into kind of our last question for today.
Yeah.
And we could do a whole series on all of this conversation. And Jess, I'm thinking that you and I may need to pitch this as a topic for pharmacist CE even in the future around how we can further help folks learn about leadership and leadership styles. And I want to touch on just that. I know from the time when you and I worked together, the desktop on your PQS laptop for a while happened to be, I believe it was John Wooden, if you don't know who John Wooden is, he's perhaps maybe now Coach K, the most famous college men's basketball coach of all time. But John Wooden is certainly in that upper echelon. He was the coach for UCLA, highly successful number of championships, but he was also an established leader in leadership development. And you had on your desktop, it was his pyramid of success. Now, that's one approach, but Jess, you have a lot of experience in looking at different forms of leadership, different personal philosophies. So can you go through just what are some different personal philosophies on leadership, how you go about selecting the right mindset that works for you and your team?
Yeah, I would say this, Coach Wooden, I guess I would probably stutter more to think that people couldn't know who Coach Wooden is. That's just the circles that I run in. I think if you look at his accomplishments, you would be hard pressed to find very few coaches out there that will ever be able to come close to the level of success he had. And it was interesting in how he did that is that he didn't prep for the other team. He just worried about making his team the best he could. And that was, there was oftentimes that the team didn't even know who they were playing that night. If you ever hear Bill Walton tell the stories, they would send people out to see what team showed up in the at the pavilion to play that night. But when it comes down to it, Coach Wooden spent years working on his personal philosophy. And it ultimately became known as the Pyramid of Success. And you can Google it and find an image of it. You can make it your own, desktop or wallpaper, whatever the right term is. But, within his framework, his framework was very much on self-improvement, right? And I would just point you to the 2 cornerstones on the bottom level, on each end. The 2 foundational cornerstones were industriousness and enthusiasm. So Coach would choose these words deliberately. And according to legend, he had these different blocks and he moved them all around the pyramid before we ultimately have what we have today. But, it was interesting. It wasn't just hard work and a good attitude. It was industriousness and enthusiasm. So there's a little more to that. I had one of my mentors tell me at one point that, you need to be able to identify your own personal philosophy. And he described it as it's how you set the sail. Now, for a kid that grew up in retail pharmacy, setting the sail was actually putting new tags out on Sunday morning for the different promotions that were happening in the store. And I didn't really understand that concept, but I guess it was probably about 5 years ago. I was in Toronto. I was asked to speak at a pharmacy conference in Toronto. And these things only come up at, weird times. It actually turns out that conference was over our wedding, my wife and I's wedding anniversary. And I thought, well, this is a tremendous honor to be asked to speak at this conference. But she typically wouldn't go to things like that with me. And I said, well, because it's our anniversary, you want to go with us? Or if you want to, you go with me. And she said, absolutely. So we went there. On that night, on our anniversary night, we are having dinner at the CN Tower in Toronto. And if you're not familiar, it's like a Space Needle type thing. There's a restaurant on top. It's right next to the baseball stadium. there in Toronto. And we looked out the window, we could see Lake Ontario. And what really captured my imagination that night is there were two sailboats on Lake Ontario going opposite directions. Now, I'm a farm kid. I grew up on a farm in Northwest Pennsylvania. That's the reason why I became a pharmacist, right? There's a lot of jokes that I endured there as an intern for sure. But what I came to learn is that it's not that to me, I thought that if you put a sailboat on the water and the wind blows, everybody just goes the same direction. And that's not true. How you set the sail determines the direction that you go. So whenever I look out on Lake Ontario and I see one boat going to the right, another boat going to the left, they have the same conditions, but they're going in different directions. Why? It's because of how they set the sail. It's based on what their philosophy is. Coach Wooden set his sail with industriousness and enthusiasm. And, that may or may not work for you. I would tell you that as I have, as I've done this examination, I have found that things that are on my list are intentionality and consistency. Those are probably the cornerstones that I have in Jess's. Now, my pyramid of success is nowhere near Coach Wooden's pyramid of success yet, but it's a work in progress. But what I have found is that so many people don't even have their sail up, and I would encourage any of the listeners to take a moment and really think about that. What are the philosophies that you subscribe to? And maybe you just need to become exposed to some of those. You'll find a lot of different ideas out there, and I'll tell you, I've found a lot of them over the years as well. And you try them out. If they work, great. If not, throw them away. Eat the meat, throw away the bones is really the phrase that I would share with you on that. But what we have is we have far too many pharmacists that have no plan to set their sail, and as such, the environment beats them up, and they're not very happy about it, and rightfully so. But I would also like to encourage everyone that there's some changes that you have the power to make yourself that can have a huge impact. I don't know if any of that helps, if that answers your question, Nick, or not. Maybe I got a little preachy there for you, but any of that resonate with you? What do you use to set your sail with, my friend?
Yeah. So one of the items, Jess, that really made a difference for me, and actually it's been kind of a catchphrase or word I use often with my coworker here at PQS. You know her, Cora Eilders. The word we use is intentionality, and that definition is it's the fact of being deliberate or purposeful. And especially in today's world, there can be so many distractions, whether it's at your work life, in your personal life, and you can be physically in one place and you're supposed to be doing one thing, but your mind is somewhere else. And I have found for myself that it really has become an important part where I am engaged with the people and the things around me, that makes the biggest difference. The other aspect of it, now Wooden had two elements that you spoke of there, and for me, the other aspect, and this goes back to what I learned from a DISC assessment that we did a few years ago at PQS. If you're not familiar with the DISC assessment, it's a personality assessment of how you work on others. There's 4 elements: dominance, influence, steadiness, consciousness. Now, I fall into that group of influence, the I. Those people are typically described as my default personality being outgoing, enthusiastic, optimistic, high-spirited, and lively, traits that most people who listen to the podcast can probably pick up from me. And I found that really when I leaned into those elements, that's where I felt most comfortable. But other people and their particular personalities, they did not respond as well to those items. Not everybody likes to deal with somebody who's always talking and energetic. And it was understanding that when interacting with people who fall in some of those other categories, I would need to tune my kind of personality. I would need to adapt and adjust so that I could be more effective. And I can say for myself, over the last 2 years, I've made a conscious effort. I've been intentional with trying to apply those practices. And I have found it to have very positive results for myself, the team members that I work with, and ultimately when I work with clients. Now, that can be a difficult thing to manage because you can't really go to every person that you talk to and say, hey, where do you land on the DISC assessment, so that you know how to interact with them. But as you spend that time intentionally speaking with them, you can start to glean where they fall on that spectrum, and then that can influence your behavioral interaction.
It allows you to sort of read their mail, right? You're able to figure out what are the things that you can do to be able to be more impactful with that. So that's a good pickup.
Yeah, and I would note here, because I used words that are, it's adapting my personality or changing how I communicate. I would note I am still being true to myself, but it's changing my communication and my approach to it. So you can do both here. Again, Jess, you said with leadership, we're not perfect and we have to be learning. You have to know when to adapt, and that's really where that comes in.
Well, if I can just chime in on that, Nick, we used a phrase during my time on the clinical team, is that clinical was not part of operations. It was very much, sort of parallel, but I couldn't go into your store and say, Nick, I need you to do this, the way your district manager could go in and say, Nick, I need you to do this. So we had the phrase, you have to be able to influence without authority. And, if you're a manager, you can influence with authority, right? You can say, do this basically or else, right? But when it comes to dealing with your patients, it very much is you have to influence without authority. Nick, as you're working with your different clients with client relations, you need to be able to influence, even though you can't, you can't make them do anything, but you need to be able to help them, maneuver and move down that. And those are all leadership skills, right? Those are things that we all have the need and opportunity to get better with. Nick, I know we're wrapping up here, but if I just want to share a couple things here, if I may, with the listeners.
Yeah, absolutely, Jess.
One is leadership is a team sport. If you're leading by yourself, you're probably struggling. And I'm going to encourage you to find a partner. Find people to go with. I have a couple of rules that I use, and one of the rules is that one of us isn't as smart as all of us. So if you can get a bunch of people together, I'm a big believer that the good Lord gives each of us sort of a fragment of an idea. And if we get together and we start talking about the same idea, a more full idea sort of presents itself. The second rule I have is that if you want to go fast, go alone. And there are a lot of people that go nowhere fast. If you want to go fast, go alone. But if you want to go far, you go together. So this is the call that, and it doesn't matter where they're at, right? It could be somebody at the neighboring store. It could even be a competitor, right? There's no, I don't think there's any danger of us running out of healthcare problems anytime soon. So, we have the opportunity to work together in that regard. And whenever you have the opportunity to work with other people, don't judge that interaction based on what you get out of it. Judge that interaction by what you put into it. Again, we all have perspectives that have value and help flesh out the things that we are trying to, to flesh out the problems that we're trying to solve. And, leaders solve problems. That's really what we're tasked to do. We're going to be solving problems. So you may have something, and this is something that I learned during my time at PQS, is that there are some voices that were naturally more quiet. And I had to make sure that I called those voices out first in the conversation, or else they would just continue to be super quiet. But they often would have such vital observations and perspectives on how to really be able to get traction in those things that we're doing. I would like to make this offer to the listeners here. We're coming up on 2022. I don't know exactly when this podcast is going to be published, but I'm assuming it's going to be sometime in December. But I want to invite anybody that's listening that wants to. I would love to connect with you. You can connect with me on LinkedIn, and I would imagine we have some mechanism to put this in the show notes or whatever. I also, for those of you that aren't too cool for using Facebook, I have a Facebook page where we do some leadership stuff, and I share some thoughts and ideas there. We can perhaps get a link to that. But also, when we get to the first of the year, I'm going to take a group of people through just 4 principles that will help you sort of jumpstart your growth as a leader moving into the new year. So as you're coming up with your New Year's resolutions, this is something that we're going to look at. It's going to ultimately, you can get more information at my website, although my website's not live yet. So depending on when this podcast drops, it may or may not be live. So I just ask for a little bit of grace there. But website is KPI Pharmacy. So KPI, my group is Keystone Pharmacy Insights. I believe in keeping pharmacists improving, right? So kpipharmacy.com. If you want to go there and sign up, at least get on the mailing list, we can let you know when we hit the first of the year, looking to do some things just to help you and really also help get that group together. So, we have a group that you can go, if you want to go far, you have a group you can go far together with. So, Nick, thank you for the opportunity to reconnect with you and with the listeners here at the Quality Corner Show here today.
Absolutely, Jess. It was my pleasure to have you back. And you know that I am always excited about talking medications, about talking patient care, about the role of the pharmacist. But this discussion we have today, to me, it's just as important. If we don't have the right people in the right positions, nothing's going to change, right? And it's the same thing with medications, right? If the patient isn't taking the right medication, they're not going to be improving their health. If we don't have the right leaders in place, all of us as members of the healthcare team aren't going to be, doing the right things. And we do want to improve healthcare. We are on a journey together. Just as you said it, there's no shortage of problems in healthcare. We got to tackle those one at a time, and we can go further if we're all together in this approach. Now, Jess, this part of the podcast as we get to the end here. We've been talking all the serious stuff, but we do always have our question at the end. It's related to quality improvement or what else you've been doing. So for you, and as you've been starting up your KPI group, in addition to that, have you worked on any new skill sets or existing skill sets that you have been further developing?
I would say that one of the skill sets that I'm working on is sales. And now we talked about setting the sail, SAIL. This is SALE, right? So I can just be more confusing on this podcast. But that is a skill that I have learned is, at least for me, was woefully underdeveloped. What are we selling as pharmacists? We're not selling drugs. We're selling good health, right? And how do we do that? And there are a lot of techniques, and this even falls into some communication issues as well, right? So that's really been my area of focus for some time now. I would also say that I've had to also learn some more technical things with trying to build a website and stuff like that, and finding people to help. And those are skills that I didn't have, and that I continue to work through. But I would say this. Speaking and sales and communication, I think those quote unquote soft skills are the X factor. You and I can figure out creatinine clearance, and we can know mechanisms of action and do renal dosing of different drugs. But if we're not able to connect with somebody and really help them take the next positive step for their health, or to be able to connect with a prescriber to help them take the next, to make the right decisions moving forward, then we struggle. And when we struggle, we get frustrated. So those are the areas that I'm working on to reduce my frustration. And I don't know that I'll ever be done with that, but that's the journey that I'm on.
Hey, and you recognize that you need to address it, and you're on that journey. So those are to me, the minimum necessary steps that we can take. So glad to hear that, Jess. It has been a pleasure to have you on the show again. It's always great to connect with you. And I know you and I will be connecting in a few weeks with our personal reviews about the new Spider-Man movie. That's a completely separate topic. And
can we do a separate podcast on that?
Reading my mind, Jess. Reading my mind on that one. But Jess, actual final question for you, and I know you mentioned it just probably 2 minutes ago, but if folks do want to reach out to you one final time, where should they go?
Yeah, probably the easiest place is on LinkedIn. You can just find me on LinkedIn. For those of you that want to, just connect with me there, and more than happy to have conversations that way. I do have a Facebook page, Keystone Pharmacy Insights, where I post different leadership thoughts, communication ideas, just different sort of brain teasers or whatever. Try to get you to look at things just a little bit different. There's also just a little bit of community that we're building there. It's a small group now, probably about 100 people in the group now, but you listener are invited to attend and join that group. And then again, with the new year, however I can help you get better is what I would love to be able to do. And one way that we can do that is by learning some 4 basic principles on how to improve your growth in the next year and sort of improve as a leader. Facebook or LinkedIn, and then website is imminent. I don't have an actual go live date on that yet, but the website address is kpipharmacy.com. So I'll race to see if I can have that up before the podcast drops, but not knowing that's where we are.
That's okay. And a good leader knows how to adjust when there are roadblocks or some things that trip them up. So that's okay. Jess, my friend, thank you again for joining on the show today. Great conversation. Really appreciate having you here. Folks, I can tell you, I am part of that Facebook group that Jess runs. I personally enjoy and have a lot of satisfaction from observing and interacting with some of the content there. So just my personal recommendation would be to join and to check that out, along with when the website does launch. But we are now officially at the end of the podcast, and I've got just a couple of final items for our listening audience. So make sure you subscribe to our podcast. And if you have a question or topic, please let us know. Similarly, if you would like to introduce a topic and come on the show to talk about it, we would love that. You can DM us on Twitter at Pharmacy Quality or by emailing info@pharmacyquality.com. Now, with that does wrap up our show. And I appreciate you, the listening audience of the Quality Corner Show. There is one final message from the PQS team.
The Pharmacy Quality Solutions Quality Corner Show has a request for you. Our goal is to spread the word about how quality measurement can help improve health outcomes, and we need your help in sharing this podcast to friends and colleagues in the healthcare industry. We also want you to provide feedback, ask us questions, and suggest health topics you'd like to see covered. If you are a health expert and you want to contribute to the show or even talk on the show, please contact us. You can email info@pharmacyquality.com. Let us know what is on your mind, what we can address, so that you are fully informed. We want you to be able to provide the best care for your patients and members, and we wish all of you listeners out there well.